I'm going to talk to you today about Renaissance art. So, we're going to look at the differences in the characteristics of classical art, medieval art, and Renaissance art. And then we're going to actually look at some pieces of Renaissance art. So, you have to make sure you're paying attention to what I'm saying because there, on that second part, there is no notes, it's just the pictures. All right, here we go. So classical art. So when we're talking classical art, we're talking Greek and Roman art. And so in Greek art, they have mostly religious and sports themes, and they have perfect proportions. So what that means is they don't have like irregularly long arms or legs. The heads aren't different sizes. They just look like people. And then they have an emphasis on emotion. So oftentimes with like religious themes, they're often trying to inspire feelings of religion or piety, or even oftentimes like thinking about like war and things that you would do for the gods. And then sports teams are trying to inspire the athletes. As far as characteristics of Roman art, you see a lot of lifelike detail and individual look. So what that means is that all the faces are different. So they look like different people. So like this one down here, you can see is two different people. And this one right here, the faces kind of look the same. So this is Greek, this one is Roman. Looking at some other types of Greek and Roman art here, so you can see statue here is leaning on a pedestal. So oftentimes the statues will show some sort of relief, which we'll talk about when we get more into the medieval art. And a lot of Greek art that we're mostly familiar with is done on vases. So you can see that in this one here. As far as Roman art, one of the really cool pieces of art that they invented is the mosaic art, where they put the different tiles together and they create a picture through that, which I'm sure is something you have done in some of your art classes as well. Okay, let's talk about medieval art. So, medieval art, for characteristics of statues, there's always relief. Oftentimes, their statues are on like they're more flat, so they have a wider base, and so they're not concentrating on having like taller things like we saw with the taller statues like we saw with the Greek, or what we're going to see with the Renaissance art. Disproportionate, so oftentimes the legs are longer or not long enough, and things are just disproportionate in relation to the way people are shaped. All the faces are the same, so with medieval artists, they often just painted one face and just use that for every piece of art that they created or sculpted in this case. And then religious themes. So religious themes pretty much dominate medieval art because all of life revolved around the Roman Catholic Church. And then when we get into the painting, so the paintings are very flat, very dull. This is right here as an example of a medieval painting. You can see that the faces are the same. It's just they're colored a little bit different. And they use what's called tempera painting, so that's why it kind of has like a yellowy look to it, because tempera painting is made out of egg yolk and water. And there's no perspective, it's very two-dimensional, and then very disproportionate. So like if you look at this here, like the head is like really way too big for the body, and Jesus's arm here, this is supposed to be Peter. Jesus's arm is very weirdly shaped, and then unusually long for his body there. So just kind of different. They didn't pay as much attention to the details as we're going to see in just a second with the Renaissance art. Okay, so here's another two other examples of different types of medieval art. So this one right here, this is actually a piece of a tapestry. So a lot of their art they would put onto tapestries and then show it that way. So obviously those are going to be very two-dimensional there. And then this is with the invention of the Gothic architecture. So we talked about the flying buttresses, the ribbed vaults allowed for thinner walls, also allowed for bigger windows, and so we start to see more stained glass. So we see a lot of this is really where we only see like a lot of color coming out is with the stained glass in medieval art. Okay, moving on to Renaissance art. So as you can see, there's a pretty big difference just looking at those two paintings there. The first one on the top was done by Da Vinci, and the second one on the bottom was done by Botticelli. So talk about the characteristics of the sculpture. So we're going to see freestanding. So it means they're not leaning on something. There's no relief. It's just the statue as it is. And then lifelike detail and expression. So we're going to see that when we look at a sculpture in a moment. And then characteristics of painting. So they show depth and shadows. So you can see in this one especially, Da Vinci was very good at showing realism, showing depth and shadows, and making it look as real as he could. Bright colors, because they started to use oil paints. So you're going to see much more brighter colors when we talk about Renaissance art. Perspective, so there's a clear foreground and a clear background, so you can see that in this one here more so. This doesn't have as deep of a background here, but emotion, realism, and then the major themes are religion, myth, and everyday life. So this one would be religion, so this is depicting the birth of Jesus, and this one would be myth because this is called the birth of Venus, who obviously was the Roman goddess of love. Okay. So let's look here at some more specific pieces. So these first couple are done by Leonardo da Vinci. You're going to see a lot of Ninja Turtles in this, so Leonardo is the first one. So this first one is called The Last Supper. So this is a very famous painting. This is in a chapel in Milan, and Da Vinci did this kind of much to his chagrin, because the Duke of Milan, he was hoping to create some inventions for him, but he wanted him to paint instead. Da Vinci wasn't really big on painting. He really just did it as a way to pay the bills. So Da Vinci did this, and this depicts the moment when Jesus says to his disciples that one of them will betray him. So you see a lot of different emotion on the faces of the different disciples and kind of how their reaction is. One of the things about this, though, is that your eye, even though there's a lot of emotion on these different, your eye immediately goes to Jesus right in the middle. And that's because of the way that Da Vinci used geometry. So if you look here, I'm going to show you here in just a second. All these lines move towards Jesus's head. If you don't believe me, there it is right there. All those lines going right to his head. You can see that the rest of the disciples are kind of on this plane, and you see them, but they're not the focal point. It's obviously as Jesus is the focal point. Now, Da Vinci, if you notice, this painting looks kind of faded and not very detailed, and a lot of that has to do not with his abilities, but more with how he painted it. So this is a fresco. A fresco means that it's a painting done on fresh wet plaster. And instead of using water-based paints like most frescoes are done with, he decided to experiment and use oil-based paints. Well, I don't know if you know this, but oil and water don't mix. So the oil is coming out of the wall. So this painting is restored like every about 10 or 20 years, just because of his use of oil-based paint. So they have to do this, have to restore it very often. So the way we see it today isn't really what Da Vinci necessarily painted. It's more what the restorers have done to keep it up. Okay. But once again, that's why it looks so faded. Okay. Next one is the Mona Lisa. So the Mona Lisa is probably his most famous painting, and it is a portrait of a woman believed to be the wife of a Florentine merchant. So her name was Mona Lisa Gioconda. And if you look on this, you could see how he shows emotion. So he shows emotion through her eyes and through her mouth. So those are the two most expressive parts of your face, are your eyes and your mouth. And you could see she's kind of got a smirk. There's a lot of debate on if she's smiling or not, and some people have decided that kind of depends on your outlook on whether or not you believe she's smiling. So if you're a more positive person, you kind of think she is. If you're not, then you probably don't. But she's kind of got this smirk, but she's kind of looking off, and you could see like she's kind of, it looks like something might be a little bit amusing to her, or maybe she's like kind of up to something or something like that. But her eyes are very expressive, and Another thing is, you can see she's sitting in a chair. There's a chair there. There's a chair back right there, and there's a windowsill. So she's sitting in front of a window, and you can see there's in the background here. There's one path that goes. It's a pretty clear path, and it goes to a nice little pond. And then there's this other path that's not quite as clear, and it goes to kind of a rocky area. And this is kind of, if you notice, this is over her right shoulder. This one is over her left shoulder. So some people believe that it's kind of Da Vinci showing the good side of human nature versus the evil side of human nature. But that's kind of up to interpretation. Also, on this, if you look, the horizon is lower on this side than it is on this side. So if you are to stand on her left, would if you were go to your left here, stand on this side of her and look at her, she looks taller than if you go and stand on this side of her over on this side. So that's just kind of a little optical illusion that Da Vinci kind of put in. Whether or not that's done on purpose, I don't know. Another interesting fact is the Mona Lisa is not done on canvas like many people believe. So this is actually done on what's called poplar wood. And poplar wood was pretty common back then to do paintings on. But so it's basically a wood plank. But what's interesting, you can see this here in the early 1800s, there was a crack that started to develop, and they put some brackets on it, and it stopped the crack. But there was a heist later in the early 20th century when the painting was actually stolen from the Louvre, and everybody was all up in arms about it. A lot of people blame Pablo Picasso, which is pretty interesting. But there was a heist, and one of the brackets broke, and the crack got a little deeper. And once they did get it back, though, they glued it together. They had a little better technology in the 20th century to glue it together and have kept it together pretty well. So if you want to go see this, this is in the Louvre, which is in Paris. And if you go to the room where she's sitting, this is what it'll look like. Lots of people there, and you can see it's not a very big painting. It's actually pretty small, but it sits behind bulletproof glass now. There's no getting to it. It's you can see there's a little barricade that goes around her, so you can't get too close, and lots of people there. This is obviously the big tourist attraction of the Louvre, is to go see the Mona Lisa. This is literally a priceless painting. It's not for sale. It will never be for sale. If it was for sale, I think estimates are upwards of $1 billion to buy it. But it will never be for sale. It belongs to the Louvre. It will always belong to the Louvre. Okay, let's talk about Michelangelo. So the first painting we're going to look at is The Creation of Adam. This is actually on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. As you can see, he shows detail. This little guy, not part of it, just had to censor it for children. So you can see this is Adam here, and then this is God here. So this is, like I said, on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, which depicts a lot of different biblical stories. And this point right here, where their fingers are almost touching, is the exact middle of the ceiling. So you could see once again, though, his use of shadow and light. But one of the things that's interesting, and a lot of people have debated on, is why God is working harder to get to Adam than Adam is to God. And I think a lot of that has to do with, back then, I think a lot of people, and even maybe today, believe that God works harder to get to us than we do to him. Okay? And so I think that's kind of what Michelangelo is depicting here. Okay, so show you more of the Sistine Chapel. So this right here is the Sistine Chapel ceiling. You can see here is the creation of Adam right there, but you can see there's a lot of different biblical stories all throughout, and you can see there's a creation of Adam there. All throughout the ceiling and even the walls. So Michelangelo was commissioned to do this by the Pope, and he had to build scaffolding up to get to the ceiling, and then he would just lay on his back and paint up. And this took him years and years to do. He made quite a bit of money doing this, but he, I think, regretted it because it took him so much time. But incidentally, this is where popes are elected. So if a new pope is being elected, they go to the College of Cardinals, will go to the Sistine Chapel. This is where they'll elect new popes. Okay, and this is where the Pope will have, the current Pope will have services and things like that. Okay. I just thought this one was funny. It's kind of his mom. Michelangelo, get in here, because he's in trouble because he drew on the ceiling. Haha. All right, this is another one done by Michelangelo. Obviously, had to be censored as well. So Michelangelo sculpted this, and you can tell it's Renaissance because you can see that it's freestanding. He's not leaning on anything. He's just standing there, okay? And it's got very lifelike detail. Everything about David is anatomically correct, okay? So if you look at like even the bones in his hands, the hair on his head, his muscles, everything is exactly perfect. And it's proportionate to how people actually are. And you can see he's even got his little slingshot right there. So this is when he's going to defeat Goliath. But one of the cool things about Michelangelo and his sculptures is most sculptors, what they'll do is they'll work around a sculpture. And what that means is like they'll sculpt it and they'll whittle it down. So once they get to the middle of it, then they can start doing the details. Okay. But Michelangelo actually worked through the marble. So this is made of marble. He worked through it and he basically started just chiseling it out and then went all the way to the back. So that's pretty interesting to me. Because he was able to see the sculpture before it was even there. So, okay. I think that answers all the questions on that. So let's go over to Masaccio. The tribute money. So this is another religious painting. So you can see that there's Jesus right there, and this is the point when the tax collectors are coming to collect taxes from Jesus and his disciples. And as you can see, he uses a lot of shadow and light, and with the clothing, but also with the background as well. So you can see that there's a clear background, there's a clear foreground, but he even shows perspective by drawing the lines out, moving your eye more towards the middle. Okay, so he's not as famous, obviously, as a Da Vinci or Michelangelo or even a Raphael, but this is pretty good painting there. So. Next one, School of Athens. So Raphael painted this one. This one actually sits in the bedroom of the Pope. And this is a secular painting. This is kind of a who's who of ancient Greece. So you got Plato and Aristotle in the middle, and this is where your eye is drawn. So you can see the lines once again. Bring your eye to the middle, okay? So there's a lot of different people depicted in this. This is a fresco painting. He did not ruin it like Da Vinci did by using oil-based paints. He used water-based paints. But he... I lost my train of thought. Anyway, he painted this, and this is, like I said, in the Pope's bedroom. So let's look at this. So this shows you who is who. So you've got different types of people, a lot of philosophers, a lot of theorists. So one of the things that's interesting is that he didn't know what everybody looked like. Nobody really knows what Plato or Socrates or anybody looks like. And so he used faces of his friends and he painted those guys. And so, like number 14 is actually Leonardo da Vinci. So that's what Leonardo looked like. It is often... This says number 20 here is Raphael, but a lot of people have speculated that this is Raphael right here, number 13. And so he's got a lot of different friends that we have figured out who they are. But you can see that it's kind of, like I said, a who's who of ancient Greece, a lot of different philosophers in that. So. This one right here is a poster that you can buy, and it's a who's who of Hollywood, 20th century Hollywood, I should say. So you got like Batman and Indiana Jones and C-3PO, R2-D2. You got, obviously your eye is drawn to Marilyn Monroe and James Dean in the middle here. But you got Dick Tracy, Jessica Rabbit, you got Gone with the Wind, Elvis. I mean, there's all kinds of people there. You just keep finding more and more celebrities that you didn't realize were there. So pretty interesting poster, interesting take on the School of Athens. So okay, Botticelli's Birth of Venus. So this is a painting done by Botticelli. It's secular. It's considered secular because it is depicting myth. So this is the moment when Venus emerges, and so this was actually a painting that was commissioned by the Medici family to hang in their home, or to be displayed in their home. And it's pretty cool because it shows movement. So I really like this one because you can see like the flowers are falling, the water is rushing in, and this is where Venus is born. Okay, so it's kind of cool. Different look at that one. All right, so that's it. And your homework assignment is going to be to create your own art. So you're going to create a type, the same picture, you're going to do it twice. Do one using medieval techniques and then one using Renaissance techniques. Okay, so look at those characteristics. So if you draw like a house, for example, you can draw a house being very two dimensional, using like very flat colors if you have colors at home. And then you could draw the Renaissance one using much more detail, showing dimension and things like that. So if you don't have colors, don't freak out. It's okay if you don't put color into it, but I would like to see the detail a little bit more in the Renaissance versus the medieval. Okay, all right. Well, you guys have a great day.